under a sky the color of old tin. The wind carried the taste of rain and dust across the Wyoming plains. Clara Dawson sat by the hearth, darning one of Jacob's shirts, the lamplight throwing a small circle of gold against the dark. Outside, the porch boards creaked in time with the wind's restless push. Her children, Emily and Samuel, were asleep upstairs, their breathing a soft counterpoint to the gusts rattling the shutters. Night in the territory was like that, quiet enough to hear the world thinking, but never so still that you could trust it. The thump came sudden. Not a gentle knock, not the drop of a loose shutter. This was heavy, final. She froze, needle in hand, the thread quivering between her fingers. The second sound was a groan, low and broken, followed by the scrape of boots against wood. Clara's heart kicked hard against her ribs. No neighbor would come this late. No one she wanted to see, anyhow. She took her husband's rifle from the rack by the door, the wood worn smooth where his hands had once gripped it. The sound of rain began, tapping soft against the roof as she stepped forward. She worked the latch, eased the door open, and the smell hit her, iron and sweat, the coppery tang of blood carried on the wet wind. He was on his knees, one hand clutching his side, the other braced against the porch rail. Tall, even folded over like that. A broad-shouldered man in a weathered coat, hat tilted low, shadowing most of his face. Blood was dark against the brown leather, seeping fast. "Help me," he rasped. The word scraped out like he'd chewed it over too long. Clara kept the rifle up. "Who are you?" "Name's Cade," he breathed, as if the name itself cost him. "Don't let them find me." The wind carried the sound of horses, far off but closing. She didn't know this Cade, didn't care to know why someone wanted him dead, but the terror in his voice wasn't for himself alone, it was a warning. The kind a man gives when he's already too far gone to run. "You've got to move," she said, stepping back, leaving the door open just enough. His eyes found hers in that moment, sharp gray but dulled by pain. She cursed herself and lowered the rifle, just enough to grab his arm. He was heavier than he looked, his weight nearly pulling her down as she hauled him inside. Blood spotted the pine floor as she kicked the door shut. "Emily! Samuel! Stay upstairs!" she called, her voice steady though her hands weren't. The children didn't answer, and she hoped that meant they were smart enough to stay put. She eased Cade onto the settee. His breath came ragged. She saw the wound. High on his right side, a bullet hole ringed in black powder burn. Too close for a clean shot. She fetched the basin, clean cloth, and her husband's old whiskey bottle. Cade watched her work, eyes flicking to the door. "They saw me ride this way," he muttered. "They'll come." "You're bleeding on my settee," she said, pouring whiskey over the wound. He hissed but didn't flinch much. "What did you do to have men chasing you in the dark?" He gave a humorless smile. "Wrong job, wrong side. I was hired to keep a man alive, but his own people decided I was worth more dead." She pressed the cloth harder, earning another hiss. "You bringing that trouble here?" "It's already here," he said, voice gone flat. "If they think I'm here, they won't leave anyone to tell about it." The sound of hoofbeats grew louder. Clara's hands froze. She glanced at the lamp, its glow a beacon through the window, and snuffed out. The room fell into soft dark, lit only by the embers in the hearth. She crossed to the door, rifle ready. 3 riders came into view, their shapes hazy in the misting rain. They reined up at her gate, silhouettes hunched and watchful. One of them swung down, boots squelching in the mud. He called out, "Evening, ma'am. Sorry to bother you. We're looking for a man, tall, coat like mine, maybe bleeding. You seen anyone?" Clara kept her voice even. "Ain't seen anyone but the night itself." The man chuckled without mirth. "Funny thing about the night, it hides things." He took a step closer to the porch. Rain beaded on the brim of his hat, sliding down his face in crooked lines. His hand rested easy on the butt of his Colt. "Mind if we take a look around?" "I do mind," she said. "My children are asleep. Storm's coming. Whatever man you're looking for, you do better hunting him where he's gone, not where he ain't." The pause was long enough for the rain to fill it. Then the rider shrugged. "If you see him, tell him Weathers is waiting." They turned, hooves sucking at the wet earth as they rode off slow, disappearing into the dark. Only when the sound faded did she lower the rifle. Her breath trembled as she let it out. She turned back to Cade, who was watching her with a new sharpness. "You've got sand," he said. "Most folks would have let them in." "I'm not most folks," she said, moving back to tend his wound. "Now lie still. You'll bleed less." He muttered something, maybe thanks, maybe nothing at all, and his eyes fluttered shut. Fever was already setting in. She worked quietly, bandaging as best she could, her mind running faster than her hands. She should have sent him back into the rain, but there was something in the way he'd looked at her on the porch, like he'd already seen enough death for one night. The clock on the mantel ticked into the small hours. Outside, the rain came harder. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote cried. Cade stirred once, calling a woman's name she didn't know, voice thick with longing. She sat back in the chair across from him, the rifle resting across her knees. She thought of her husband, how he'd gone out one morning to drive cattle and never come back. Shot in the back by rustlers for a herd barely worth the bullets. She'd buried him on the hill with her own hands, the red earth staining her nails for days. Since then, she'd kept the ranch running, kept the children fed, kept herself out of other folks' wars. Until tonight. Lightning flashed, throwing Cade's pale face into sharp relief. He looked younger in that light, and not nearly as dangerous. But then the thunder followed, and she remembered the way he'd drawn her into his fight, with a single plea. She must have dozed in the chair, because the next sound was a sharp crack, gunfire, too close. She was on her feet before she'd thought, rifle up. Cade was already half-risen, hand reaching for his revolver. A shadow moved past the window, then the porch boards creaked. The door shuddered under a hard kick. Cade's revolver barked once, the shot loud enough to wake the dead. A grunt, then silence. Clara's ears rang in the stillness. She yanked the door open. A man lay sprawled in the mud, rain pooling in the hollow of his throat. His hat had rolled off, face pale in the storm's dim light. She didn't know him, but the leather vest and tied-down holster told enough he was one of the riders. Cade leaned against the doorframe, breath harsh. He wasn't going to knock polite, he said, eyes scanning the darkness for more. "We need to be ready. They'll keep coming." Clara stared at the dead man, the rain soaking into her hair, running cold down her spine. She'd spent years building a life behind walls, wood earth and willpower. Tonight, they'd been kicked open. She didn't know yet whether she'd let him stay come morning. But she knew one thing as she closed the door against the storm. Whatever he'd brought to her porch, it wasn't done with him yet. And the rain, steady and cold, kept falling. Dawn came gray and cold, the clouds hanging low over the Dawson place like a lid on a pot ready to boil over. Clara stepped onto the porch with a shovel in her hand and the dead man at her feet, his body stiff from the night's chill. Cade stood in the doorway, pale but upright, his revolver at his hip. The fever had left his eyes glassy, but there was steel in them still. "We can't leave him here," Clara said. Cade nodded once, then limped forward, gripping the porch post for balance. He crouched with a grunt, hooked his hands under the man's arms, and dragged him off the boards into the wet earth. Clara took the legs, and together they hauled him past the barn to the far end of the pasture where the ground was soft from the rain. She dug, while Cade kept watch, scanning the horizon. By the time the hole was deep enough, her back burned and her fingers were raw from gripping the shovel handle. They rolled the body in, dirt thudding against the man's chest as they covered him. Clara tamped the mound flat and wiped her brow with the back of her hand. "That's the last of him," she said, though it didn't feel like the truth. A man like that never came alone. As they walked back toward the house, smoke smeared the horizon of the west, rising in thick black columns. Cade stopped dead, his jaw tightening. "That'll be Boyd's place," he said. "He's got the bad luck of owning land both sides want." Clara had heard the name Boyd, a widower with a small herd and no kin nearby. "You're saying this is part of the same trouble?" Cade looked at her, the wind tugging his coat open to show the fresh bandage beneath. "It's all the same trouble. Two ranchers, Harlan Briggs and Thomas Ketch, been at each other's throats over water rights since spring. hired me to keep one of their men breathing long enough to testify. Then Ketch's men decided they didn't want witnesses on either side. Figured I'd be easier to kill than keep around. You're telling me both sides are willing to burn a man's life for a creek? He gave a short, humorless laugh. Out here, water's worth more than man. Or 10. They were halfway to the house when a sharp crack split the air, followed by another. Gunfire. The sound was close, too close. Cade's hand went to his revolver, even as he swayed on his feet. Clara didn't wait for him to steady himself. Inside, she snapped. She herded him through the door, then ran for the rifle by the hearth. Emily's face peered down from the upstairs landing, pale as chalk. Upstairs, Clara ordered, "Take Samuel. Don't come down unless I tell you." The front yard exploded in hoofbeats and shouts. Cade pulled himself to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. 5 of them, he said, coming fast. Clara's heart hammered in her chest. She had not fired her husband's rifle since the day he died. She remembered the sound, the kick, the way her hands had trembled after. But there was no time for remembering. There was only the here and now, and the riders closing in. The first bullet smashed through the front window, spraying glass across the room. Clara dropped behind the table, breath loud in her ears. Cade returned fire, his shots measured, precise. One rider pitched sideways off his horse, landing hard in the dirt. The others split, 2 circling wide toward the barn, the others pressing the front. Clara darted to the back window, spotted one rider leaning from the saddle to light a torch. She raised the rifle, sighted on the flicker, and squeezed the trigger. The torch flared and fell, its bearer tumbling after it. Smoke bit her nostrils, not from the torch, but from the rifle's black powder, sharp and acrid in the still morning air. She racked the lever, chambered another round. Cade was firing again, but his movements were slower, his breath ragged. One of the riders made it to the porch, boots thudding on the boards. Clara swung her rifle toward the sound and fired without thinking. The man slammed into the doorframe, a red bloom spreading across his chest, and crumpled. The fight broke as suddenly as it began. The 2 remaining riders wheeled their horses and pounded away, their curses fading with distance. Cade lowered his revolver, his shoulders sagging. "They'll be back," he said. Clara stood there, rifle in hand, the echo of the shot still ringing in her bones. Her stomach lurched, and she turned aside, retching into the sink. When she straightened, Cade was watching her, not with judgment, but with something like respect. "You held your ground," he said. "I killed a man," she replied, her voice hollow. "You saved your children," he countered. "There's a difference." They spent the rest of the morning patching the windows with boards and checking the damage. Cade moved stiffly, his wound slowing him, but his hands were sure when they worked. At midday, Clara found him on the porch, his gaze fixed on the far hills. "Why are you still here?" she asked. His answer was slow, careful. "Because I've seen enough to know you won't last a week alone, not with what's coming. And because I owe you for the roof over my head and the blood I'm still carrying." That night, after the children were asleep, Cade sat by the fire with his coat off, the flames throwing deep shadows across his scarred arms. He told her about the war, how he'd fought in blue, marched from Tennessee to Georgia, buried more friends than he could name. After the war, the land he went home to was gone, taken by men with faster lawyers. So he took to riding for hire, his skill, with a gun, the only thing folks were willing to pay for. "I thought I could buy a piece of quiet," he said. "Enough coin to get out of the game for good. But every job pulls you deeper. And some men don't let you walk away." Clara listened, the rhythm of his voice blending with the crackle of the fire. She understood more than she wanted to admit. The frontier had its way of taking a man's choices and grinding them into dust until all that was left was survival. When the fire burned low, Cade leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "We can't sit here, waiting for them to come. Your place is too far from the next ranch, too close to open ground. You need to get your children to the sheriff in Rawlins. He's the only one willing to take on both Briggs and Ketch. That's 30 miles, she said. Through country they know better than I do. I'll ride with you, he said. We move at dawn. Take the wagon until we can't. Then we go on foot. She didn't answer right away. She looked toward the staircase where she could just make out Emily's quilt hanging over the rail and thought of the bodies already buried in this land. All right, she said finally, but we're taking my rifle. They rose before the sun, the air sharp with the bite of approaching winter. Clara loaded the wagon with what they could carry: blankets, food, a jug of water. Cade moved with a soldier's economy, checking his revolver, tucking spare rounds into his coat. Emily and Samuel climbed into the back, their eyes wide but silent. Clara took the reins, Cade settling beside her with the rifle across his lap. The horses pulled into the road, their breath steaming in the morning chill. The house fell away behind them, small against the endless sweep of prairie. The sky was a wash of pale light, the kind that made you think the day might stay calm. But Clara knew better. Calm was just the pause between storms. They had gone less than 2 miles when Cade's hand tightened on her arm. "Rider," he said. She followed his gaze to the tree line, where a dark shape kept pace with them, slipping in and out of sight. Another joined it, then a third. "Don't look back," Cade murmured. "They'll follow. Let them. We want them close enough to know where we're headed, but not close enough to make their move." Clara's grip on the reins tightened. Every creak of the wagon, every snort from the horses felt louder than it should. She kept her eyes on the road ahead, the ruts filled with last night's rain. By midday, the clouds had thickened, pressing low and dark. Cade scanned the horizon, his jaw set. "They're waiting for us to hit the flats before they strike. Too much cover here in the draws. What happens when we hit the flats?" He looked at her, and the weight in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. "Then we see if they're willing to die for a creek." The wind cut sharper on the flats, carrying the smell of dry grass and distant rain. The prairie opened wide ahead of them, a sweep of pale gold under a sky stretched thin. Clara kept the reins steady, the wagon wheels jolting over ruts hardened by sun and wind. Cade sat beside her, rifle balanced across his knees, his eyes never still. Emily and Samuel huddled under a blanket in the back, their faces pale, watching everything and saying nothing. "They'll make their play soon," Cade murmured without looking at her. His voice was calm, but there was a tautness beneath it, like a rope pulled to snapping. "No cover here. They know it." She kept her gaze on the road, her knuckles white on the leather. "Then what?" "Then you do exactly what I tell you, and we might see Rollins by nightfall." A flicker of movement broke the horizon to their right, 3 riders' shadows against the pale grass. Moments later, 2 more appeared on the left, closing the gap. Clara's stomach tightened. Cade shifted his rifle, the barrel catching a brief glint of sun. "They'll try to run us off the wagon," he said. "When I say, pull hard to the left. Don't hesitate." The riders fanned out, their horses kicking up dust that hung in the still air. Clara could see their faces now, hard-eyed men, mouths set in grim lines, guns at the ready. One of them grinned at her, slow and ugly, as if the outcome was already decided. "Now," Cade barked. Clara jerked the reins left, the wagon lurching hard. Cade's rifle cracked, the shot ringing sharp across the flats. One rider pitched sideways, his horse bolting. Another shot followed, and the grinning man's smile vanished as he dropped from the saddle. The remaining 3 pressed in, spurring their mounts, gunfire snapping past the wagon. The horses screamed and lunged forward, the wagon bouncing so violently Clara's teeth rattled. Cade fired again, then ducked low as a bullet tore a splinter from the seat beside him. "Head for that draw," he shouted, pointing to a shallow cut in the land ahead. "It'll give us a little cover." She steered toward it, the wagon careening down into the dip. The riders followed, but the uneven ground slowed their pace. Cade turned in his seat, firing twice more. One horse reared, throwing its rider into the dirt. The other 2 pulled back, circling wide. "They're not giving up," Cade said, wiping sweat from his brow. His face was pale, his breath ragged. The bandage under his coat had darkened. "We can't outrun them," Clara said. "No, but We can make them pay for coming. They pushed on until the draw narrowed, the banks rising on either side. Cade motioned for her to stop. We'll leave the wagon. Too easy a target. He climbed down slowly, his movements deliberate, every step measured. Clara helped the children down, shoving the blanket into Emily's arms. Stay low. Stay behind me. They scrambled up the far bank, keeping to the scrub where they could. Cade's breathing was harsh now, but his eyes stayed sharp. He scanned the ridge, then pointed to a cluster of rocks. That's where we make our stand. They settled in just as the riders appeared at the mouth of the draw. The men reined up, scanning the bank. One of them cupped his hands around his mouth. Send us Cade, and we'll let the woman and kids walk. Cade gave a short laugh that held no humor. You hear that, he said to Clara. They think liars make good bargains. They won't let us go, she said quietly. No, they won't. The riders advanced, spreading out. Cade's rifle cracked, dropping the lead horseman. Clara lifted her own rifle, sighting on the second. The man leaned from his saddle to fire, but her shot took him clean through the chest. He slid out of the stirrups and lay still. The last rider turned to run, but Cade's revolver barked twice, and the man toppled into the dust. Silence settled over the draw, broken only by the wind whispering through the grass. Cade sagged back against the rocks, his rifle slipping from his hands. Clara moved to his side, catching him as he slumped. Blood seeped warm against her fingers. Stay with me, she said, her voice fierce. He looked at her, the edges of his mouth twitching into something like a smile. You did fine. You're not dying here, she said. Not after all this. His breath shuddered. Some fights you don't walk away from, but you made them pay. That's what matters. She shook her head, but his eyes were already dimming. You've got more grit than most men I've known, he whispered. Don't waste it. The light went out of him like a candle snuffed. For a moment, the wind seemed louder, the sky wider. She closed his eyes with her fingertips, her own vision blurring. The children crept closer, their faces pale. Emily took her mother's hand, and Clara squeezed it hard. We're going to Rawlins, she said. We finish what he started. She left Cade's body by the rocks, covering him with his coat. The walk back to the wagon was long and heavy. The horses stood restless, but unhurt. She loaded the children, climbed onto the seat, and set the team moving. By the time they reached the edge of Rawlins, the sun was low and red, staining the horizon like spilled blood. The sheriff's men met them on the road, rifles in hand, eyes narrowing at the sight of the bullet holes in the wagon. What happened to Cade? The sheriff asked. He's dead, Clara said, but I've got his word on who hired the men that killed him, and I'm ready to swear it. The sheriff nodded grimly. That'll be enough to put Briggs and Ketch in the dock. She handed him Cade's revolver. He wanted it to end. The days that followed were a blur of statements, questions, and the wary stares of men who weren't sure what to make of a widow who'd stood her ground. Briggs and Ketch were taken into custody, their hired guns scattered. The range war fizzled, not with a treaty, but with the sudden understanding that killing for water had become too costly. Weeks later, Clara stood on her porch again, the wind soft against her face. The house bore the scars of the fight, patched boards, a new pane of glass in the front window, but it stood. The children played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the air. She looked to the west, where the land rolled away in long waves of grass, and thought of Cade, his sharp eyes, the way he'd steadied her rifle without ever touching it, the gravel in his voice when he told her she had grit. She had not asked for this fight, but it had come to her all the same, and she had met it head-on. The wind came hard off the ridge, carrying dust and the faint tang of gunpowder, the smell of men who had already decided someone wouldn't see sunrise. Jack McCrae crouched behind the stone trough, his rifle braced across the rim, his cheek pressed to the worn walnut stock, his eyes locked on the barn where the smoke from a snuffed-out lantern still curled into the night. Somewhere beyond that, Boone Carver's men waited. He could feel them. The yard lay in shadow. The moon ducked behind a bank of clouds, the stars sharp as nails in the black. Every sound seemed too loud, the drip of water from the pump, the restless stamp of the mule in its pen, the low rasp of Lily's breathing behind him. She clutched her revolver, knuckles white, jaw set. He'd told her to stay inside. She hadn't listened. "You're not facing them alone," she said, voice steady in spite of everything. Jack didn't argue. Not now. A whistle cut through the night, short, sharp, deliberate, answered by another, farther off. They were spreading, boxing them in. Jack's stomach nodded. "You hear that?" Lily murmured. He gave a slight nod. "Means they're ready to move." From the corner of his eye, he caught a flicker, movement near the corral fence. His finger tightened on the trigger, then eased. Not yet. Boone's boys wanted him nervous, jumpy. They'd be patient, draw him out, take the shot on their terms. Inside the house, the two orphans Lily had taken in huddled near the hearth. Jack could picture them, wide eyes, clutching the blanket she'd thrown over their shoulders. He'd never thought himself a man for protecting anyone else's kin. But now, with Boone out there and the weight of that night pressing down, he'd die before letting them be taken. A rifle cracked from the far side of the barn. The bullet bit into the trough inches from Jack's hand, splintering stone. Lily flinched, but didn't drop her aim. "They're testing distance," Jack said. "Next one won't be a warning." Her voice was low. "Then we hit first." He almost smiled. "Almost. On my mark." The second shot came from the opposite side, a feint. Jack ducked, rose, and sent a round into the dark. The blast echoed, sharp against the hills. Boone's men answered, their fire lighting the shadows with brief orange flares. The air filled with the flat crack of rifles, the sting of stone chips, the dry, metallic taste of fear. Lily fired twice, both shots quick, sure. One of them drew a grunt. Jack took that as a good sign. The moon slid free of the clouds, spilling silver across the yard, and for a moment Jack saw them, three shapes slipping from the barn's far side, rifles low, moving fast. "They're flanking," he barked. Lily pivoted, her revolver spitting flame. One man stumbled, dropped to his knees. The others ducked behind the woodpile. Jack's rifle bucked in his hands, and another shape fell. The wind carried a voice then, slow, taunting, rich with malice. "McCrae, you can't win this. Hand over the girl and the brats, and I might let you walk away." Boone Carver. Jack rose just enough to see over the trough. "You ride in here with guns. You'd better be ready to pay in blood." A pause, then Boone's laugh rolled out low and cold. "Reckon I am." The next volley came harder, closer. Glass shattered inside the house. One of the children screamed. Jack's chest tightened, the sound cutting deep. He shifted, taking position between the trough and the door. Lily inside. "Now. I can hold." Inside. His tone left no room for argument. She hesitated, then obeyed, vanishing into the doorway with a last, fierce look. Jack breathed deep, feeling the weight of the rifle, the heat of the barrel against his palm. He was alone now, the way he'd been too many times before. And, like before, there was no one coming to save him. The barn door swung wide, and Boone stepped into the moonlight. Broad-shouldered, dark coat, hanging open, a pistol loose in his hand. His eyes gleamed, catching the light like a predator's. "You always were stubborn," Boone called, but stubborn's just another word for foolish. Jack didn't answer. Words wouldn't matter now. Boone lifted his hand, and the yard erupted in gunfire. Bullets tore into the trough, the pump, the porch. Jack dropped low, heart pounding, ears ringing. He felt the bite of splinters along his cheek, smelled the acrid tang of black powder. Then silence. Boone's boots crunched in the dust. Closer. Jack's grip tightened. One chance. A shadow fell across him. He rose, rifle up, but Boone was quicker. The pistol roared, fire flashing inches from Jack's face. The force knocked him back, pain lancing through his shoulder. He hit the dirt, vision swimming. Through the haze, he saw Boone advancing, slow, sure the pistol steady now. "You should have run when you had the chance," Boone said. From the porch, a shot rang out, Lily's revolver. Boone staggered, cursed, swung toward the sound. Jack used the moment, rolling, bracing the rifle one-handed. He squeezed the trigger. The shot hit Boone square in the chest. He stumbled, dropped the pistol, looked down at the spreading dark on his shirt. "You," he started, but the word never finished. He fell, heavy and final, the dust rising around him. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then Boone's men broke, scattering into the night. Jack lay back, breath ragged, the world tilting. Lily was beside him in instant, hands pressing against his wound, eyes bright with worry. "Stay with me," she said, voice sharp, urgent. He tried to smile, but it came out more like a grimace. "Told you we'd hold him." She shook her head, tears tracking through the dust on her cheeks. "You stubborn fool." The sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance. The yard was still again, save for the soft whimper of the children at the doorway. Jack let his eyes close, just for a moment, feeling the warmth of Lily's hands, the cool night air on his face. He wasn't sure what came next, but for now, Boone was dead, the ranch still stood, and those under his roof were safe. For a man like him, that was enough.